can share with your staff if you want to have a few more, but you cannot be that close together, floor of the House, with that many people in here. And I thank the Senate and the Democrats for getting by the rules. Let's go. Let's just start. Okay.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the two houses have taken their places at the clerk's desk. Without objection, the tellers will dispense with the reading of the formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors. Mr. Blunt. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Point of order, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. In order to follow with the Speaker's instructions that only a limited number of people be on the floor, may I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary inquiry in the future if you're not on the floor but in the gallery?
Under Section 18 of Title III of the United States Code, debate is not permitted in the joint session. Gentleman's recognized.
I'm not attempting to debate. I'm trying to find out how a parliamentary inquiry or a parliamentary point of order would be made in following with the Speaker's request that most of us not be on the floor. How do you make one of those points of order when you don't know what's going to happen later?
Respectfully, the gentleman's parliamentary inquiry constitutes debate, which is not permitted in the joint session under Section 18 of Title III United States Code. With that, Mr. Blunt.
I don't think it's on.
I don't believe it's on.
It's not on.
All right.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Order in the chamber.
Mr. President,
Gentleman will continue.
the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 9 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alabama that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none. This certificate from Alaska, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote from that state that purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of the state purporting to appoint and ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 3 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alaska that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none, this certificate from Arizona, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote that the state purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arizona seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Joseph R. Biden Jr. of the state of Delaware received 11 votes for president, and Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 11 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is. I need the next page. An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law, Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given.
Are there further objections to the certificates from the state of Arizona? The chair hears none. The 2 houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session. The Senate will now retire to its chamber.
guess, can Joe and I hop off? Okay. We'll be tight. We'll hang tight. I mean, we'll be close by. We will not be in the room. Okay. Oh, that's not.
The chair will remind members of the need to adhere to the decorum requirements of the chamber as laid out in the Speaker's announced policies of January 4th, 2021, in accordance with the guidance and advice of the attending physician. Members are advised to remain in the chamber only if they are participating in debate and must wear a mask at all times, even when under recognition for debate. Members must also practice proper social distancing when present in the chamber. Let the record show that there is a gross violation of this guidance from the attendants on the Republican side of the aisle. Please, in the interest of your own health and as an example to the American people, abide by the numbers now up to 25 on each side of the aisle, to participate in this stage of the development, okay? Pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution 1, pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 and Section 17 of Title III of the United States Code, when the two houses withdraw from the joint session to count the electoral vote for separate consideration of an objection, a representative may speak to the objection for 5 minutes and not more than once. Debate shall not exceed 2 hours, after which the chair will put in the question, shall the objection be agreed to? The clerk will report the objection made in the joint session.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given. Signed, Paul Gosar, Representative, State of Arizona. Ted Cruz, Senator, State of Texas.
Thank you. The chair will endeavor to alternate recognition between members seeking support of the objection and members seeking opposition to the objection. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to object to a number of states that did not follow the constitutional requirement for selecting electors. Madam Speaker, this is something that is clear that our founding fathers debated about as a fundamental decision of how we choose our president. There was a lot of back and forth, if anyone reads the founding documents of our country, about the different versions they went through to ultimately come up with a process where each state has elections, each state has a process for selecting their electors and sending them to Washington. And Madam Speaker, in a number of those states, that constitutional process was not followed. And that's why we're here to object. If you look at what the requirement says, nowhere in Article 2, Section 1 does it give the Secretary of State of a state that ability. Nowhere does it give the governor that ability. Nowhere does it give a court that ability. It exclusively gives that ability to the legislatures. And in fact, in most states, that's the process that was followed. But for those states that this wasn't followed, unfortunately, this is not new. We've seen over and over again more states where the Democrat Party has gone in and selectively gone around this process. That has to end, Madam Speaker. We have to follow the constitutional process. Now, there might be reasons why some people don't like the process laid out by a legislative body. Madam Speaker, I served on one of those legislative bodies when I was in the state legislature for 12 years. I served on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee where we wrote the laws for our state's elections. And I can tell you, when we had to make changes, those were extensively negotiated. We would have people on both sides come, Republicans and Democrats, Madam Speaker, would get together to work through those changes, any minute change, to how a precinct would function, to how a change would be made in the time of an election, signature requirements, all the many things that involve a clerk carrying out the duties in each parish, in our case. You would see people come and give testimony. Madam Speaker, both sides could come. Clerks of court were there in the hearing rooms. It was an open process, by the way, not behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room where somebody might want to bully a Secretary of State to get a different version that might benefit them or their party or their candidate. That's not what our founding fathers said is the process. Maybe it's how some people wanted to carry it out, but they laid out that process. And so when we would have to make those changes, they were in public view. They were heavily debated. And then ultimately, those laws were changed in advance of the election so everybody knew what the rules were. People on both sides knew how to play the rules before the game started. not getting somewhere in the process and saying, well, you don't think it's going to benefit you, so you try to go around the Constitution. That's not how our system works. It's gotten out of hand. And so President Trump has called this out. And President Trump has stood up to it. So many of us have stood up to it. And in fact, over 100 of my colleagues, Madam Speaker, asked the Supreme Court to address this problem just a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, the court chose to punt. They didn't answer it one way or the other. They didn't want to get in the middle of this discussion. We don't have that luxury today. We have to discuss this. We have to fix this. In fact, on our first full day of this Congress, many of us brought legislation onto the House floor to start fixing the problems with our elections, to restore integrity to the election process, which has been lost by so many millions of Americans. And we had a vote. Every single Republican voted to reform the process. Every single Democrat voted against it. They don't want to fix this problem. But the Constitution is our guide. And it's time we start following the Constitution. It's time we get back to what our founding fathers said is the process for selecting electors. That's the legislatures. In public view, not behind closed doors, not smoke-filled rooms, not bullying somebody that might give you a better ruling. Let's get back to rule of law and follow the Constitution, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman It's over now. I thought it was Jamie. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for
Madam
5
Speaker,
minutes.
Madam Speaker, this day marks a crossroads for American democracy. Those who object to the counting of the Electoral College votes, which reflect the votes of the American people, want to substitute their preferences for the voter's choice. That's not what our Constitution requires, and it's at odds with the American Democratic Republic. If Congress selects the next president instead of American voters, we'll have no need for an electoral college. In fact, we'd have no need for presidential elections at all. We'd be moving from a government elected by the people to a government selected by those already governing. That's not America. In the United States, we abide by the choices of the people, not an elite few. The framers of our Constitution considered whether to have Congress select the president and specifically rejected it. Instead, they wrote Article 2 and the 12th Amendment. Article 2 creates the Electoral College, where each state appoints electors. Laws of all 50 states and D.C. require electors to vote for the winner of the state's popular election. Each state provides for the orderly conduct of elections, including lawful challenges, recounts, and the like. The 12th Amendment is what brings us to today. It says the electors meet in their states. That happened December 14th. The amendment says the electors shall cast their votes, sign and certify them, transmit them to a seal. That's been done. The sealed envelopes containing the signed, certified ballots from each state's electors, reflecting the votes of the people, were in those mahogany boxes. The 12th Amendment directs the president, as the vice president, as the president of the Senate, to do only this: open the sealed envelopes, and then the vote shall be counted. Simple. It doesn't say counted in a manner that some members of Congress or the vice president might prefer. No. The votes are simply to be counted as certified and transmitted by the states. During Reconstruction after the Civil War, more than one slate of electors were appointed by states. Dueling lists were sent and protracted processes were undertaken in presidential elections. And as a result, to make an orderly process, Congress enacted the Electoral Count Act of 1887. This law governs our proceedings today. The act provides dispute resolution mechanisms. Under the ECA, if a governor certifies a slate of electors and there are no competing slates from that state, the governor's certified slate must be counted. Today, every single slate of electors, won by Joe Biden or won by Donald Trump, got their governor's certification. Not a single state submitted a competing slate. There's no dispute to resolve. The 2020 election was the most secure election conducted in modern history. Challenges were resolved by lawful recounts and audits. The result, Vice President Biden won the 2020 election. More than 60 lawsuits were filed contesting elements of the election process. None of these lawsuits prevailed. Why? As even President Trump's own judicial appointees ruled, there was no evidence of any wrongdoing that would change the outcome. The people spoke. It was not a close election. The margin of victory for Biden in 2020 was larger than Trump's margin in 2016. In fact, the Biden victory is one of the most decisive in modern times, exceeding the margin enjoyed by Reagan when he defeated Carter in 1980. Congress has gathered in joint session to count electoral votes every 4 years since 1789. I understand the disappointment people feel when their candidate for president loses. I've felt the same several times in my voting life. When that happens, it's not an invitation to upend the Constitution and the laws of the United States. It's an invitation to work with the new president for the good of the country and to wait for the next election in 4 years if you're dissatisfied. In that spirit, I urge my colleagues to uphold the American democracy and reject the objection, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Who is that? For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Americans instinctively know there was something wrong with this election. During the campaign, Vice President Biden would do an event and he'd get 50 people at the event. President Trump, at just one rally, gets 50,000 people. President Trump increases vote with African Americans, increases vote with Hispanic Americans, won 19 of 20 bellwether counties, won Ohio by 8, Iowa by 8, and Florida by 3. Got 11 million more votes than he did in 2016, and House Republicans won 27 of 27 toss-up races. But somehow, the guy who never left his house wins the election? 80 million Americans, 80 million of our fellow citizens, Republicans and Democrats, have doubts about this election. And 60 million people, 60 million Americans think it was stolen. But Democrats say, no problem, no worries, everything's fine. We asked for an investigation. We asked Chairman Nadler, Chairwoman Maloney for an investigation. They said no. Wouldn't want to investigate something that half the electorate has doubts about. It's just the presidency of the United States. Why? Why not one single investigation? Why not even one single hearing over the last 9 weeks in the United States House of Representatives? Why? Because all the Democrats care about is making sure President Trump isn't president. For 4.5 years, that's all they've cared about. July 31st, 2016, before he was elected the first time, Jim Comey's FBI takes out the insurance policy, opens an investigation on the president based on nothing. May 17th, 2017, Bob Mueller named special counsel. 2 years, they investigate the Russia hoax, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, and $40 million of taxpayer money for nothing. December 18th, 2019, Democrat House members vote to impeach President Trump based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge who was biased against the president and who worked for Joe Biden. But none of that worked. As hard as they tried, none of that worked.
We'd never see the whole nation accept an election again. Every 4 years would be a scramble for power at any cost. The Electoral College, which most of us on this side have been defending for years, would cease to exist, leaving many of our states with no real say at all in choosing a president. The effects would go even beyond the elections themselves. Self-government, my colleagues, requires a shared commitment to the truth and a shared respect for the ground rules of our system. We cannot keep drifting apart into two separate tribes with a separate set of facts and separate realities, with nothing in common except our hostility towards each other and mistrust for the few national institutions that we all still share. Every time in the last 30 years that Democrats have lost a presidential race, they've tried a challenge just like this. After 2000, after 2004, after 2016. After 2004, a senator joined and forced the same debate. And believe it or not, Democrats like Harry Reid, Dick Durbin, and Hillary Clinton praised them and applauded the stunt. Republicans condemned those baseless efforts back then. And we just spent 4 years condemning Democrats' shameful attacks on the validity of President Trump's own election. So look, there can be no double standard. The media that is outraged today spent 4 years aiding and abetting Democrats' attacks on our institutions after they lost. But we must not imitate and escalate what we repudiate. Our duty is to govern for the public good. The United States Senate has a higher calling than an endless spiral of partisan vengeance. Congress will either override the voters, overrule them, the voters, the states, and the courts for the first time ever, or honor the people's decision. Will either guarantee Democrats' delegitimizing efforts after 2016 become a permanent new routine for both sides, or declare that our nation deserves a lot better than this. We'll either hasten down a poisonous path where only the winners of election actually accept the results, or show we can still muster the patriotic courage that our forebears showed not only in victory but in defeat. The framers built the Senate to stop short-term passions from boiling over and melting the foundations of our republic. So I believe protecting our constitutional order requires respecting the limits of our own power. It would be unfair and wrong to disenfranchise American voters and overrule the courts and the states on this extraordinarily thin basis. And I will not pretend such a vote would be a harmless protest gesture while relying on others to do the right thing. I will vote to respect the people's decision and defend our system of government as we know it.
Leader.
Mr. President, Vice President, as prescribed by the Constitution and the laws of the nation, the purpose of this joint session is for tellers, appointed on a bipartisan basis by the two houses, to read to the Congress the results of an election that has already happened. We are here to receive an announcement of a vote that has already been certified by every state in the Union and confirmed by the courts many times over. We're here to watch the current Vice President open envelopes and receive the news of a verdict that has already been rendered. It is a solemn and august occasion, no doubt, but it is a formality. The Congress does not determine the outcome of elections, the people do. The Congress is not endowed with the power to administer elections. Our states are given that power. By the end of the proceedings today, it will be confirmed once again something that is well known and well settled. The American people elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be the next President and Vice President of the United States. And yet, a number of our colleagues have organized an effort to undermine and object to that free and fair election. They're in the minority. They will lose. They know that. They have no evidence of widespread voter fraud upon which to base their objections. That's because there is none. There is none. Not brought before any of the courts successfully. They know that President Trump and his allies have suffered a defeat in court after court across the country, losing no fewer than 62 legal challenges. And I might add, many Republican-appointed judges, some appointed by President Trump, rendered those decisions. They know, you all know, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be sworn in as President and Vice President of the United States on January 20th. But they are going to object to the counting of the vote anyway. And in the process, they will embarrass themselves, they will embarrass their party, and worst of all, they will embarrass their country. This insurrection was fortunately discouraged by the leadership of the majority party, but it was not quelled. It is a very sad comment on our times that merely accepting the results of an election is considered an act of political courage. Sadder and more dangerous still is the fact that an element of the Republican Party believes their political viability hinges on the endorsement of an attempted coup. That anyone, much less an elected official, would be willing to tarnish our democracy in order to burnish their personal political fortunes. Over the course of the afternoon, and however far into the evening this band of Republican objectors wants to take us, senators of goodwill from both sides of the aisle will explain why these challenges must be dismissed. The senators from states whose electoral votes are being challenged will explain how the allegations of fraud are baseless. And a substantial bipartisan majority must vote to put down these objections and defend the sanctity of our elections and indeed, our great and grand democracy. Because that's what we're talking about today. The health of our democracy. This wonderful, beautiful, grand democracy where the peaceful passing of the torch is extolled by school children in the second grade, but not by some here. As we speak, half of our voters are being conditioned by the outgoing president to believe that when his party loses an election, the results must not be legitimate. As we speak, the eyes of the world are on this chamber, questioning whether America is still the shining example of democracy, the shining city on the hill. What message we send today? What message will we send today to our people, to the world that has so looked up to us for centuries? What message will we send to fledgling democracies who study our Constitution, mirror our laws and traditions, in the hopes that they too can build a country ruled by the consent of the governed? What message will we send to those countries where democratic values are under assault and look to us to see if those values are still worth fighting for. What message will we send to every dark corner of the world where human rights are betrayed, elections are stolen, human dignity denied? What will we show those people? Will we show those people that there is a better way to ensure liberty and opportunity of humankind? Sadly, a small band of Republican objectors may darken the view of our democracy today, but a larger group of senators and House members from both sides of the aisle can send a message too. That democracy beats deep in the hearts of our citizens and our elected representatives, that we are a country of laws and of not men, that our traditions are not so easily discarded, even by our president, that facts matter, that truth matters, that while democracy allows free speech and free expression, even if that expression is anti-democratic, there will always, always be, praise God, a far broader and stronger coalition ready to push back and defend everything we hold dear. We can send that message today by voting in large and overwhelming numbers to defeat these objections. My colleagues, we each swore an oath just 3 days ago that we would defend and support the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that we would bear true faith and allegiance to the same. We swore that we took this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that we could well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office we were about to enter, so help us God. The precise words of that oath were shortly written after the Civil War, when the idea of true faith and allegiance to this country and its Constitution took on enormous meaning. Let those words ring in the ears of every senator today. Let us do our duty to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help us God.
Majority Leader.
I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Texas, Senator Cruz.
Mr. President.
Senator.
We gathered together at a moment of great division, at a moment of great passion. We have seen, and no doubt will continue to see, a great deal of moralizing from both sides of the aisle. But I would urge to both sides perhaps a bit less certitude and a bit more recognition that we are gathered at a time when democracy is in crisis. Recent polling shows that 39% of Americans believe the election that just occurred, quote, was rigged. You may not agree with that assessment, but it is nonetheless a reality for nearly half the country. I would note it is not just Republicans who believe that. 31% of independents agree with that statement. 17% of Democrats believe the election was rigged. Even if you do not share that conviction, it is the responsibility, I believe, of this office to acknowledge that is a profound threat to this country and to the legitimacy of any administrations that will come in the future. I want to take a moment to speak to my Democratic colleagues. I understand your guy is winning right now. If Democrats vote as a bloc, Joe Biden will almost certainly be certified as the next president of the United States. I want to speak to the Republicans who are considering voting against these objections. I understand your concerns, but I urge you to pause and think. What does it say to the nearly half the country that believes this election was rigged if we vote not even to consider the claims of illegality and fraud in this election? And I believe there's a better way. The leaders just spoke about setting aside the election. Let me be clear, I am not arguing for setting aside the result of this election. All of us are faced with two choices, both of which are lousy. One choice is vote against the objection. And tens of millions of Americans will see a vote against the objection as a statement that voter fraud doesn't matter, isn't real, and shouldn't be taken seriously. And a great many of us don't believe that. On the other hand, most, if not all of us, believe we should not set aside the results of an election just because our candidate may not have prevailed. And so I endeavored to look for door number 3, a third option, and for that I looked to history, to the precedent of the 1876 election, the Hayes-Tilden election, where this Congress appointed an electoral commission to examine claims of voter fraud. 5 House members, 5 senators, 5 Supreme Court justices examined the evidence and rendered a judgment. And what I would urge of this body is that we do the same. That we appoint an electoral commission to conduct a 10-day emergency audit, consider the evidence, and resolve the claims. For those on the Democratic aisle who say there is no evidence, they've been rejected, then you should rest in comfort. If that's the case, an electoral commission would reject those claims. But for those who respect the voters, simply telling the voters, go jump in a lake, the fact that you have deep concerns is of no moment to us. That jeopardizes, I believe, the legitimacy of this and subsequent elections. The Constitution gives to Congress the responsibility this day to count the votes. The framers knew what they were doing when they gave responsibilities to Congress. We have a responsibility. And I would urge that we follow the precedent of 1877. The Electoral Count Act explicitly allows objections such as this one for votes that were not regularly given. And let me be clear, this objection is for the state of Arizona, but it is broader than that. It is an objection for all 6 of the contested states to have a credible, objective, impartial body hear the evidence and make a conclusive determination. That would benefit both sides. That would improve legitimacy of this election. And so let me urge my colleagues, all of us take our responsibility seriously. I would urge my colleagues, don't take perhaps the easy path, but instead act together, astonish the viewers, and act in a bipartisan sense to say we will have a credible and fair tribunal, consider the claims, consider the facts, consider the evidence, and make a conclusive determination whether and to what extent this election complied with the Constitution and with federal law.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I first would like to say I appreciate the words of our leader, Senator Schumer, as well as Senator McConnell's call for a higher calling. January 6th is not typically a day of historical significance for our country. For centuries, this day is simply the day that we receive each state's certified electoral votes, and it has come and gone without much fanfare. In fact, this is only the 3rd time in 120 years that the Senate has gathered to debate an objection, and as Senator Cruz well knows, both times these objections were resoundingly defeated. The last time the vote was 74-1. Why? Because senators have long believed that they should not mess around with the will of the people. They have understood the words of our great former colleague John McCain from the state of Arizona, who once said that nothing in life is more liberating than to fight for a cause larger than yourself. In this case, my colleagues, our cause, despite our political differences, is to preserve our American democracy, to preserve our republic, because as someone once said long ago, it's a republic if you can keep it. Now, I appreciate all my Democratic and Republican colleagues who have joined our ranks of coup fighters, who have stood up for our democracy, who stand tall for our republic, and who believe in an ideal greater than ourselves, larger than our political parties. That ideal is America. And Senator Cruz, he knows this. On January 20th, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in as President and Vice President of the United States. He knows that President-elect Biden won more votes than any president in history and more than 7 million more votes than President Trump. Despite the unfounded conspiracy theories Senator Cruz touts, he knows that high-ranking officials in President Trump's own Homeland Security Department have concluded that the 2020 election was, quote, the most secure in American history. And if he wants to improve the numbers in his own party that he just mentioned of people believing in our elections, maybe he should start consulting with them. Or maybe he should start consulting with former Attorney General Barr, who said that he has found no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election. We don't have to go back to 1877, my colleagues. Senator Cruz knows that 80 judges, including conservative judges, including judges confirmed in this chamber, nominated by President Trump, has thrown out these lawsuits, calling them baseless, inadequate, and contrary both to the plain meaning of the constitutional text and common sense. And he knows that all 10 living defense secretaries, including both of Trump's defense secretaries, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, William Cohen, he knows that all these leaders have come together to say that these scurrilous attacks on our democracy must stop, and we must allow for a peaceful transition of power. Senator Sinema will fill you in on the specific facts as to why this election was sound and true in Arizona, but a summary. President Trump received 1,661,686 votes in the state. President-elect Biden won 1,672,143 votes, meaning that he won the state by 10,457 votes. On November 30th, after Arizona's Republican governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the conservative Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court certified the results of the election, the governor actually said, "We do elections well here in Arizona. The system is strong." 8 post-election lawsuits brought in Arizona to challenge the results were dismissed by judges. 9 members of the House from Arizona were elected in the same election, including 4 Republicans. And colleagues, I did not see Senator Cruz over at their swearing-in in the House of Representatives last Sunday asking for an audit. He did not stop their swearing-in because there was no fraud. And he did not ask for an audit because we had a fair election. I will end with this. My friend Roy Blunt, my fellow Rules Committee leader, many years ago found a statue, a bust of a man at the top of a bookcase. He did research. He went to the historians, and all he could find out was that no one knew who this guy was, except that he was a cleric. Hence, the statue is called the Unknown Cleric. Now, at the time, our leaders thought this man important enough that they would warrant a statue for him. But today, no one knows who he is. Senator Blunt's message to school kids and senators alike that visit his office when he shows them the statue, what we do here is more important than who we are. Senators, what matters is not our futures, not our own short-term destinies. What matters is our democracy's destiny. Because I think many of us know that people will not know who we are 100 years from now or 200 years from now. But what they will know is this. They will know what we did today, how we voted today, and that is more important than who we are. It's a republic if we can keep it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Majority Leader.
I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I intend later to address the specifics of Pennsylvania if and when an objection is raised with regard to Pennsylvania. For now, I want to address my remarks to what I think is the fundamental question being posed by the objectors. And that is, does Congress have the constitutional authority to decide which states' electoral college votes should be counted and which should not, based on how well we think they ran their elections. This is what the objectors are really asking us to do, to federalize elections by rejecting electoral college votes from states whose processes they say they disapprove of, and thereby having Congress select the President of the United States instead of the American people. The answer, Mr. President, is no, there is no such authority under the Constitution. The Constitution assigns to the states the responsibility to conduct elections. It's clear in Article 2, Section 1. It leaves courts with the responsibility to adjudicate disputes, and it assigns to Congress the ministerial function of counting ballots, except for extreme circumstances, such as when a state sends competing slates of electors to Congress. Which brings me to the 1877 precedent. Some objectors claim to merely want a commission to conduct an audit and then let states decide whether to send different electors. Well, first, the situations are not at all analogous. In 1877, Congress had before it 2 slates of electors from several states. Here, there are no Trump electors from swing states. There's just Biden electors. Second, legislatures from the swing states, they've already spoken. They've made their decision. They've chosen not to send us alternative electors. Third, a commission? Really? It's completely impractical, and we all know it, with 14 days to go before a constitutionally mandated inauguration. But look at it this way. If the objectors are right, and it really is Congress's job to sit in judgment on the worthiness of the state's electoral processes, then what's the criteria for acceptable election processes? What investigations have been conducted of these processes? What body has deemed that certain states' processes are unacceptable? What opportunities were these states given to challenge the findings? Why are the objectors objecting only to swing states that President Trump lost? What about the ones he won? I don't know, North Carolina. What about California? They have ballot harvesting, I'm told. If this is all supposed to be Congress's job, you'd think we'd have answers to these questions and procedures in place, because we would have done this every 4 years, right? But we don't, because it's not our job. If we adopt this new precedent that we sit in judgment of states' processes, then we're federalizing the election law. We would necessarily have to establish the permissible criteria and rules for the state's elections. The ballot harvesting example, it's illegal in some states. It's encouraged in others. Does it become mandatory or forbidden depending on who's in control of Congress? And as the leader pointed out, it would be the end of the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is the mechanism by which the people select the president. But if Congress gets to decide which states get to vote in the Electoral College, then clearly Congress is selecting the president, not the people. Whichever party controls both houses of Congress would control the presidency. The public would never tolerate Congress picking the president instead of themselves, so they'd abolish the Electoral College, as many of our colleagues would like to do. And the end of the Electoral College, of course, means the nation will be governed by a handful of big blue states and regions that can drum up very large numbers. Mr. President, the Constitution does not assign to Congress the responsibility to judge the worthiness of state election processes, nor its adherence to its rules. That's the responsibility of the states and the courts. Let me conclude with this. I voted for President Trump. I publicly endorsed President Trump. I campaigned for President Trump. I did not want Joe Biden to win this election. But there's something more important to me than having my preferred candidate sworn in as the next president. And that's to have the American people's chosen candidate sworn in as the next president. A fundamental defining feature of a democratic republic is the right of the people to elect their own leaders. It's now our duty, it's our responsibility to ensure that that right is respected in this election and preserved for future elections. I urge you, vote against this objection.
Democratic leader.
Mr. Vice President. Senator from the great state of Arizona, Senator Sinema.
Senator from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to share the facts about Arizona's recent election and to urge my colleagues to step away from divisive political rhetoric and step towards renewing Americans' faith in our democracy. The 2020 Arizona election was a success. not for any one party or individual, but as a demonstration of the will of the voters. A record 80% of registered voters participated, thanks to local Arizona election officials who ensured our system worked and our laws were upheld. Arizona has offered early voting for more than 100 years, and our vote-by-mail system includes strict safeguards. All ballots include tracking mechanisms and tamper-resistant envelopes. Election staff are trained to authenticate signatures, and Arizona imposes severe criminal punishments for ballot tampering. The Arizona election produced bipartisan results in which members of both parties won races, and these results have been confirmed by stakeholders across the political spectrum. The Republican chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors said, "No matter how you voted, this election was administered with integrity, transparency, and in accordance with Arizona state laws." The Republican Speaker of the Arizona State House rejected calls for the legislature to overturn the election, saying, "As a conservative Republican, I don't like the results of the presidential election, but I cannot and will not entertain a suggestion that we violate current law to change the outcome." 8 challenges contesting the Arizona election were brought to federal and state courts. All 8 were withdrawn or dismissed, including a unanimous ruling by the Arizona Supreme Court. The Chief Justice wrote, "The challenge fails to present any evidence of misconduct or illegal votes, let alone establish any degree of fraud or a sufficient error rate that would undermine the certainty of the election results." During a recent committee hearing, I asked a simple question of the former Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security. Did he find any evidence disputing the integrity or fairness of Arizona's election? His answer was simple: no. Arizona and our 15 counties should be congratulated for running a secure election. Perhaps the most heartening demonstration of Arizona's election success is Jocelyn from Phoenix. Jocelyn is 18 years old and was a first-time voter in 2020. So was Rachel from Tucson, and 1,000 more Arizonans who for the first time exercised their constitutional right to decide their own leaders. Today's challenge to Arizona's election fails any factual analysis. More disturbingly, it seeks to rob Jocelyn and Rachel and more than 3 million Arizonans of a free, fair election. Those of us who are trusted with elected office are first and foremost public servants. We serve our constituents. We do not seek to substitute our personal ambitions for the will of the American people. Our system allows for a continuous contest of ideas, and those voters who support the losing side of a free, fair election have not been disenfranchised. Rather, they maintain just as an important a voice in America's future. And leaders have a duty to serve all of our constituents, including those who voted for other candidates. Great leaders in our history face the choice of whether to take an action strengthening our democracy, even if a different action would better serve their political ambitions. Many are revered today because they chose our republic over their self-interests, including my personal hero, Senator John McCain. Following his presidential loss, Senator McCain said, "The American people have spoken. Senator Obama and I have argued our differences, and he has prevailed. Whatever our differences, we are fellow Americans." He spoke to the nearly 60 million Americans who voted for him, saying, "It is natural tonight to feel some disappointment, but tomorrow we must move beyond it and work together to get our country moving again." Senator McCain was right. Today we have serious, significant work to do, beating this pandemic and reviving our economy. I urge my colleagues to follow the example of Senator John McCain and so many others. Reject this meritless challenge and uphold the will of Arizona voters. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Oklahoma, Senator Lankford.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, in America, we settle our differences in elections. What happens if you don't trust the election count, or you're concerned that so many courts denied or dismissed cases within hours after they were given thousands of pages of evidence? The reason we have a Congress to settle our nation's divisions and the rules of the Senate make sure that every opinion in the nation is heard is so issues like this can be addressed. The constitutional crisis in our country right now is that millions of Americans are being told to sit down and shut up. Their opinions matter. During the electoral challenge on January the 6th, 2005, Senator Ted Kennedy stood on this floor and said this. He said, "I commend the many thousands of citizens in Massachusetts and other states who insisted on treating today's electoral vote count in Congress as a meaningless ritual would be an insult to our democracy unless we register our own protest against the obviously flawed voting process that took place in so many states. We are hopeful," he said, "that this major issue that goes to the heart of our democracy is now firmly implanted on the agenda for effective action by Congress." End quote. I agree. The United States Constitution does not allow me to assign different electors to a state, nor should it. The United States Constitution does not give the option to the Vice President of the United States to just unilaterally decide which states are in and out, and it should not. Each state decides its electors through its people. But a small group of senators, including myself, have demanded that we not ignore the questions that millions of people are asking in our nation. So we have proposed a constitutional solution. Pause the count. Get more facts to the states before January the 20th. We proposed a 15-member commission, just like what was done after the failed election of 1876. We're encouraging people to spend 10 days going through all the issues so states can have one last opportunity to address any challenges. Then the states, as the Constitution directs, would make the final decision on their electors. I have some colleagues who have said that a 10-day commission is not enough time, so they have counter-proposed, just ignoring the lingering questions. We need to do something. My challenge today is not about the good people of Arizona.
And it will stand in recess until the call of the chair.
We'll pause.
Protesters are in the building.
Thank you.
There wasn't anything you said.